London, 1888. Picture a city shrouded in perpetual twilight, where gaslight struggles against the fog, where the clatter of horse-drawn carriages echoes through narrow streets, and where two worlds exist side by side, separated not by miles, but by money. On one side, the grandeur of the British Empire at its zenith, Queen Victoria reigning over territories spanning the globe, opera houses, gentlemen's clubs, and townhouses glowing with electric light, a new marvel of the age. On the other side, Whitechapel, the East End, a place where 30,000 people lived crammed into a single square mile, where entire families shared one damp room, where disease, desperation, and darkness ruled the streets. And in the autumn of that year, within those fog-choked alleys, someone began to kill. Not in rage, not in haste, but with a method, a purpose, and a precision that would terrify a nation and transform our understanding of murder itself. The killer left no name, no face, no clear motive, only bodies, and a legend that would never die. The world came to know this phantom as Jack the Ripper, but here's what makes this story truly remarkable. Jack the Ripper was never caught. His identity remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Yet despite, or perhaps because of this, he became the template for every serial killer story that followed. He was the first modern monster. This is the story of how 5 murdered women in Victorian London gave birth to an entirely new category of criminal, how a series of brutal crimes in one of the world's poorest neighborhoods sparked the beginning of modern criminology, and how a killer who was never identified managed to haunt our collective imagination for over 130 years. This is the story of Jack the Ripper. Not the myth, but the reality, the investigation, the victims, the panic, and the legacy that changed everything. But to understand the Ripper, we must first understand the world he emerged from, a world of stark inequality where survival itself was a daily battle. The London of 1888 was the largest city on Earth. Over 5 million people called it home, making it the beating heart of the most powerful empire the world had ever known. But empires are built on contradictions. If you walked west from Whitechapel, within 30 minutes you'd find yourself in a different universe. Mayfair, Belgravia, streets lined with elegant Georgian townhouses, women in silk dresses stepping from polished carriages, men in top hats discussing business over brandy in mahogany-paneled clubs. This was the London of progress, of the Great Exhibition, of innovation, of confidence in British superiority, and the righteous mission of civilization. But walk east, back toward Whitechapel, and watch as the buildings grow closer together. The streets narrow, the air thickens with coal smoke and the stench of unwashed bodies, rotting vegetables, and open sewers. This was the other London, the one polite society preferred to ignore. Whitechapel in 1888 was a place of crushing poverty. Workers, those lucky enough to have work, labored 16-hour days in factories, docks, and sweatshops for wages barely enough to survive. The area was a maze of narrow alleys with names that told their own stories. Bucks Row, Hanbury Street, dark, twisting passages where the sun rarely reached street level. Housing was desperate. Common lodging houses, essentially Victorian hostels, charged 4 pence a night for a bed. Miss that payment and you'd sleep on the street, in doorways, or if you were very lucky, in a workhouse. Disease was rampant. Tuberculosis, typhoid, cholera. Life expectancy in Whitechapel was roughly half that of wealthier areas. Many didn't live past 40. And then there was the gin. Cheap alcohol offered temporary escape from the grinding misery. Pubs lined every street, their warm lights and promise of oblivion drawing in those who had nowhere else to turn. This is where we must speak honestly about the women who would become Jack the Ripper's victims. In Victorian London, an estimated 1,200 women worked as prostitutes in Whitechapel alone. They were euphemistically called unfortunates, a term that captured society's mixture of judgment and pity. These weren't the courtesans of the West End or the mistresses of wealthy men. These were women at the absolute bottom of the economic ladder. Widows, domestic servants who'd lost their positions, women fleeing abusive marriages, women who simply couldn't find other work. The arithmetic was brutal. Earn 4 pence somehow, or sleep in the cold. For many, the choice wasn't really a choice at all. They worked the streets at night, approaching men in the darkness, leading them to secluded courtyards or alleyways. The encounters were brief, transactional, dangerous, and in the autumn of 1888, they became fatally so. The Metropolitan Police, founded only 60 years earlier, were meant to keep order in this chaos, but they were overwhelmed. The East End was undermanned, under-resourced. Officers walked beats alone, carrying only a wooden truncheon and a whistle for backup. They dealt with drunken brawls, domestic violence, theft, assault. Crime was so common it barely merited investigation unless someone died. Detective work was still in its infancy. Fingerprinting wouldn't be adopted for another decade. Crime scene photography was rudimentary. DNA analysis was science fiction, a century away from reality. What police had were witness statements, basic physical evidence, and instinct. Against a killer who struck in darkness and vanished like smoke, these tools would prove woefully inadequate. One more element completed this volatile mixture: immigration and prejudice. Whitechapel had a large Jewish immigrant population, primarily refugees from Eastern European pogroms. They spoke Yiddish, practiced different customs, and lived in tight-knit communities that seemed mysterious to outsiders. This difference bred suspicion. When the murders began, this latent prejudice would explode into something darker, feeding conspiracy theories and vigilante violence. So this was Whitechapel in 1888, a pressure cooker of poverty, desperation, and social decay, a place where life was cheap and death came easily. It was the perfect hunting ground for a predator, and on the night of August 31st, that predator claimed his first confirmed victim. They're known as the Canonical Five, the victims definitively attributed to Jack the Ripper. But before they were victims, they were people. Women with names, histories, and dreams that poverty had slowly crushed. Let's remember them not as statistics in a horror story, but as human beings. Marianne Nichols, Polly to those who knew her, was 43 years old when she died. Once, she'd had a different life: a husband, 5 children, a home. But alcohol and poverty had taken it all. By 1888, she drifted between workhouses and lodging houses, taking whatever work she could find: laundry, cleaning, anything. And when that wasn't enough, she walked the streets. On the night of August 30th, she'd been thrown out of a lodging house on Thrall Street. She didn't have the 4 pence for a bed. She was last seen around 2:30 a.m., wearing a new bonnet she was proud of, telling a friend, "I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now." Less than an hour later, a carter named Charles Cross discovered her body in Bucks Row, a dark, narrow street lined with warehouses. She was lying on her back, her throat cut so deeply the vertebrae were visible. Her abdomen had been slashed open. The brutality shocked even hardened police officers, but what truly disturbed them was the timing. Medical examiners estimated she'd been killed no more than 30 minutes before discovery. The killer had worked quickly, efficiently, then vanished into the maze of streets. The murder was noted in newspapers but didn't cause particular alarm. Violent deaths in Whitechapel, while tragic, weren't unusual. That would change in 8 days. Annie Chapman, known as Dark Annie for her wavy dark hair, was 47. Like Polly Nichols, she'd once had a family, a husband, stability. That life had crumbled. She lived in Crossingham's lodging house on Dorset Street, described by a contemporary policeman as the worst street in London. She made a few pennies selling flowers and crochet work, supplementing it by working the streets when desperate. On September 7th, she returned to her lodging house ill and drunk. The deputy keeper testified later that she'd said, "I am weak and ill and have been in the infirmary." Still, when she couldn't pay her DOS money, she was sent back onto the streets at 1:45 a.m. "Never mind, Tim," she reportedly said. "I'll soon be back. Don't let the bed." At 5:55 a.m., a resident named John Davis found her body in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. The sight made him physically ill. Her throat was cut, but this time the killer had done more, much more. Her abdomen was opened, intestines placed over her shoulder. Sections of her uterus and bladder had been removed and taken away. This wasn't rage, this was surgical. Dr. George Bagster Phillips, the divisional police surgeon, examined the body at the scene. His report was clinical but chilling. The killer demonstrated anatomical knowledge and had worked with considerable precision. Despite poor lighting and the risk of discovery, the murderer had methodically dissected a human being in a matter of minutes. Now the newspapers paid attention. "Latest horrible murder in Whitechapel," screamed the headlines. The public began to realize this wasn't random violence. This was something new, something terrifying. Someone was hunting. Victim 3, Elizabeth Stride, September 30th, 1888. Elizabeth Stride was 44, Swedish by birth, and known in lodging houses as Long Liz for her height. She'd come to London decades earlier, married, and, like the others, seen her life deteriorate into poverty after her husband's death. She earned money cleaning rooms and, when necessary, the same way Polly and Annie had. September 30th was a rainy Saturday night. Elizabeth was seen several times that evening, singing in the street, somewhat drunk, wearing a red rose pinned to her jacket. At 1 a.m., a traveling salesman named Louis Dimeschutz drove his cart into Dutfield's yard off Berners Street. His horse shied at something in the darkness. He struck a match and found Elizabeth Stride lying in a pool of blood, her throat freshly cut. The blood was still flowing. But here's what puzzled investigators. Her body showed none of the abdominal mutilation that had characterized the previous murders. She hadn't been posed or dissected. The conclusion was immediate and horrifying. Louis Dimeschutz had interrupted the killer. Jack the Ripper had been forced to flee mid-murder, unsatisfied, his work incomplete, which meant he was still out there, still hunting, and he was angry. Victim 4, Catherine Eddowes, September 30th, 1888, 45 minutes later. Catherine Eddowes was 46 years old. Friends called her Kate. She'd lived with a man named John Kelly for 7 years in a relatively stable relationship, despite their poverty. On the night of September 29th, they'd returned from hop picking in Kent, seasonal work that provided temporary income. They split up to find separate lodgings. Kate, having drunk too much, was found lying in the street by a police officer and taken to Bishopsgate Police Station to sober up. At 12:55 a.m., less than an hour after Elizabeth Stride's body was discovered, Kate was released from the station. She was cheerful, singing slightly as she left. "Good night, old cock," she said to the officer. Those were her last recorded words. At 1:44 a.m., just 49 minutes later, Police Constable Edward Watkins walked into Mitre Square on his regular beat. He'd passed through 14 minutes earlier and seen nothing. Now he found Catherine Eddowes. What the killer did to her was unprecedented in its savagery. Not only was her throat cut and her abdomen opened, but her face had been mutilated. Cuts across her nose, eyelids, and face. Her intestines were removed. Her left kidney and most of her uterus were taken. The killer had done all this in complete silence, in a public square, in less than 15 minutes, including the time to escape unseen. Dr. Frederick Gordon Brown, the City of London police surgeon, examined the body. His conclusion was even more disturbing than Dr. Phillips had been. The killer not only had anatomical knowledge, but had worked with a great deal of knowledge as to the position of the organs. The police made another discovery that night. A piece of Catherine's blood-stained apron was found in a doorway on Goulston Street, along with a chalk message on the wall above it. "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Whether written by the killer or coincidentally present, the message sparked fear of anti-Semitic violence. Sir Charles Warren, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, ordered it erased before dawn, a decision that would haunt the investigation. 2 women murdered in one night. The press dubbed it the double event, and London erupted in panic. The killer was no longer just bold, he was unstoppable. He'd killed twice in under an hour, in different police jurisdictions, and vanished without a trace. Vigilance committees formed, armed citizens patrolled the streets, suspects were attacked based on nothing more than foreign accents or suspicious behavior. Jack the Ripper had become more than a murderer. He'd become a symbol of every fear Victorian London harbored about the darkness lurking beneath civilization's surface. But he wasn't finished. 6 weeks later, he would commit his most horrific act yet. Mary Jane Kelly, November 9, 1888. Mary Jane Kelly was different from the other victims in 2 important ways. She was young, only 25, and she had a room of her own. That room at 13 Miller's Court was tiny, barely 10 feet square, with a broken window stuffed with rags. But it was hers, a place where she could take clients indoors, a small measure of safety and privacy. Mary Jane was described as attractive, blonde, and educated, able to read and write, which was unusual in Whitechapel. She'd come from Ireland or Wales, accounts vary, and she'd apparently once worked in a high-end brothel in the West End before circumstances pushed her east. On the evening of November 8th, she was seen drinking in local pubs. She owed rent, 29 shillings, and needed money. Around 2 a.m., she was spotted by a witness named Mary Ann Cox, bringing a client back to her room. The man was stout, shabbily dressed, carrying a pail of beer. That was the last time anyone saw Mary Jane Kelly alive. At 10:45 a.m. on November 9th, her landlord's assistant broke through the door. Mary Jane had been behind on rent. What he saw through the broken window made him stagger backward. The police were called. Even experienced detectives couldn't enter without steel in their hearts. One officer said later he'd never seen anything like it, not in decades of police work. Mary Jane Kelly had been systematically dismembered in her own bed. The scene was so horrific that detailed descriptions were withheld from newspapers. The editors feared they would cause mass hysteria or copycat crimes. What we know, the attack lasted hours. The killer had time, privacy, and light from the fireplace. He'd removed organs, arranged them around the room. Her face was rendered unrecognizable. Photographs were taken, some of the earliest crime scene photography. They remain sealed in archives to this day, considered too disturbing for public viewing. And then, nothing. Jack the Ripper vanished. no more murders with his signature methodology occurred. He'd committed what appeared to be his masterwork, and then he was gone, like fog burning off in morning sunlight. The investigation into the Whitechapel murders was in many ways the first modern manhunt, and it was an absolute disaster. Not through lack of effort, thousands of hours were spent, hundreds of officers deployed, but the police were fighting with tools from a previous century against a type of criminal no one had encountered before. Consider what investigators didn't have: no fingerprint database, no DNA analysis, no psychological profiling, no CCTV or security cameras, no way to track people's movements, no centralized criminal record system. What they did have: witness statements, often from drunk or unreliable sources, given in the dark, describing someone seen briefly in fog-filled streets. Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline led the investigation. He was experienced, intelligent, and dedicated. He also knew Whitechapel intimately, having worked in the area for years. But Aberline and his team were facing something unprecedented: a killer with no apparent connection to his victims, who struck without warning, left no useful evidence, and disappeared into the crowded East End like water into sand. Several people claimed to have seen victims with men shortly before the murders, but their descriptions were maddeningly vague and often contradictory. Medium height, or perhaps tall, dark clothes, or possibly light-colored, foreign-looking, or perhaps very English, with a mustache or clean-shaven, carrying a bag, or maybe not. One witness described a well-dressed man with a deerstalker hat. Another described a shabby working man. Yet another swore they'd seen someone in a long coat carrying what might have been a medical bag. Were these all different people, the same person in disguise? Or were witnesses simply unreliable, their memories colored by fear and newspaper sensationalism?